Out on the Wyoming plains where dawn rises slow and the silence feels older than memory, a rancher named Arthur Shelby was expecting a small, quick-footed cow horse, just the kind of partner a man leans on when the land is testing his limits. But what rumbled out of that delivery trailer wasn't a cow horse at all. It was a mountain, a towering draft giant with shoulders like living granite and hoofs that thudded like distant thunder. And for a moment, Arthur thought the universe had finally misfired on him for good, because on a fading ranch held together by grit, prayers, and the ghost of better years, this wasn't just the wrong horse. It was the worst possible mistake, or so he believed. What Arthur didn't know not yet was that this mistake had arrived with a purpose big enough to change the man, the ranch, and the future of everything he thought he'd already lost. And the unbelievable part, it all started the moment the giant looked him in the eyes. Before we dive into this unbelievable Wild West tale, hit like, subscribe, and share to help grow WestTalesas A Down, where we bring the West's most powerful, heart-stirring stories to life. Your support helps us keep these incredible ranch stories riding strong. Now let's head back to the plains. The dust was already rising before Arthur Shelby heard the truck around his ranch. That fine Wyoming powder hung in the air like a permanent reminder of a land that had been running on empty for too many years. Arthur wiped his palms on his faded jeans, stepped away from the broken corral panel he'd been trying to mend, and squinted down the long gravel drive. He wasn't much for hope these days, but today was supposed to be different. He'd finally managed to buy himself a horse. Not a miracle horse, not something fancy or flashy, just a sturdy little bay gelding. A cow horse with enough grit in his bones to help Arthur move cattle, tow the occasional calf back into line, and give an old rancher one last season that didn't he feel like a slow unwinding of everything he'd ever built. A small horse, a manageable horse, a horse Arthur could actually afford. But as the delivery trailer came closer, rattling like it held a dinosaur trying to burst out, Arthur felt something shift. The trailer bounced harder than a horse that size should have required. The driver looked nervous, and before Arthur could ask a single question, the man swung open the back gate. The shadow hit Arthur first, broad, heavy, and dark enough to cool the sweat on his neck. Then the horse stepped out, and Arthur's breath simply evaporated. The animal that emerged was not small, no manageable, not anywhere near the realm of what could reasonably be considered a cow horse. It was a giant, a true draft colossus, towering over Arthur with the long, feathered legs of a war steed, and a chest so wide it looked like it had been carved out of ancient timber. Its coat gleamed dark as storm-washed soil, and a wide blaze cut down its face like a lightning strike. Arthur took a single step back, not out of fear. He'd worked horses all his life, but there's a kind of presence some animals carry, the kind that makes a man reconsider his place in the world. This horse had it in spades. You that's lot 42, Arthur asked. The driver didn't even check. Matches the tag, matches the manifest. Enjoy. And with that, the man flipped the clipboard shut, hopped into his truck, and peeled out of the yard as if he'd just delivered a bear. Arthur stared after him, stunned. Dust settled around his boots, and when he finally turned back, the giant horse was still standing there, completely unbothered, surveying the ranch like it owned the deed. "This ain't right," Arthur muttered. "Not even close." But the horse just blinked at him, slow and calm, as if to say, "Well, what now?" For a long moment, Arthur simply stood there, arms hanging at his sides. He had spent 40 years learning how to judge a horse at a glance. This was no quarter horse, no cutter, no ranch pony. This beast was built for pulling timber, or hauling wagons through mud thick enough to steal a boot clean off your foot. That in the world was he supposed to do with a walking mountain? Still, he reached out a cautious hand. The horse lowered its head surprisingly gentle, Surprisingly respectful hand breathed warm air over Arthur's calloused palm. The touch wasn't aggressive or skittish. If anything, the animal seemed relieved to have company. Arthur let out a slow breath. Great, he muttered. £1,000 gift I didn't ask for. He grabbed the halter and led the horse toward the holding pen. The animal followed, careful and steady, like it knew its own weight could flatten a fence post if it sneezed too hard. By the time Arthur got it secured, he was sweating for entirely different reasons. He dug the auction catalog out of his coat pocket and flipped pages with increasing disbelief. Lot 42, compact big gelding. Good cow sense. And yet here stood a draft giant who looked like he could plow half of Wyoming before lunch. The catalogs weren't wrong. The universe was. That night, Arthur sat at his kitchen table beneath a flickering bulb, dialing every number on the paperwork. The auction house sent him through for different recordings. The transport company insisted on no returns after delivery. By the time midnight rolled round, he'd learned one thing for certain. He was stuck with the wrong horse. Days passed, then weeks, and the problems began to pile up like ranch house bills. For starters, the sheer size of the horse whom Arthur eventually named Samson, because what else do you call a creature built like an ancient strong man, became its own daily challenge. The barn stall barely fit him even after Arthur removed the partition. The fencing groaned. The bunkhouse cats watched him from the rafters like he was some newly discovered predator species. The cattle wanted nothing to do with him. They fled at the mere thud of his hoofs. Ranch work became a juggling act. Herding cows with a horse terrified of cattle made no sense, and herding cattle terrified of the horse made even less. And feed? Samson ate like winter was coming for the whole planet. Arthur found himself calculating hay rations every morning. He'd pitch a bale into the feeder and watch his winter supply shrink with each slow, steady mouthful. More than once, he leaned his forehead against the barn wall and whispered, "I can't keep this up, big fella. I just can't."
But something unexpected was happening too. Samson, despite his size, moved like a creature always aware of the fragility around him. He stepped aside precisely when Arthur walked near. He lowered his head gently for haltering. He shifted his weight so Arthur could brush his enormous shoulders without climbing too high. A horse that size shouldn't have been delicate. But Samson was. And then there was the silence. Arthur had been living alone ever since Martha passed. A silence that used to swallow him whole at night now changed its shape when Samson was near. The giant horse filled spaces differently, not with noise but with presence, with steadiness, with life. Arthur found himself talking more than he had in years. About the drought. About Martha. About the weight of holding a failing ranch together with stubbornness and baling wire. Samson would chew, slow and rhythmic, occasionally nudging Arthur's arm, as if to say, "Keep going. I'm listening." It wasn't the companionship Arthur expected, but it was the companionship he needed. Still, the mistake loomed over him. Samson was not a solution. Not a working partner. Not a cow horse. He was simply here. And Arthur didn't yet understand why. He didn't know that the blizzard coming in a few short weeks would reveal the reason. He didn't know that this wrong horse, this impossible mix-up, would soon become the only thing standing between life and death. And he had no idea just how unbelievable the next chapter of his life was about to become. Winter arrived early that year, too early for any man still trying to stretch the last of his hay through the cold months. But Arthur had lived long enough on that ranch to know when the wind was carrying more than a chill. Something heavy was moving in from the mountains, the kind of storm people talked about for years afterward. He could feel it in his knees, in the way the air settled flat against the land, in the uneasy shifting of the cattle. Even Samson seemed restless. The giant draft horse stood in the corral that morning, head high, ears flicking, his breath rising in slow clouds. He wasn't spooked. Samson rarely spooked. But he was alert, more alert than Arthur had ever seen him. You feelin' it too? Arthur murmured. A gust of wind swept across the property, carrying a taste of ice. He didn't need more warning. By midday the sky had turned the color of a bruised plum, deep purple on the horizon, sickly gray overhead. The temperature dropped fast enough to sting Arthur's lungs when he breathed. Snowflakes, thin at first, began drifting down like ash from a distant fire. Within minutes they thickened into sheets. Arthur didn't have the luxury of hunkering down. His cattle were still scattered over the upper pasture, and no one else was coming to help. He grabbed his coat, pulled his hat low, and trudged out into the rising storm. He tried not to think about how far behind he was. Tried not to think about the ranch bills stacked on his kitchen counter. Tried not to think about Samson, pacing like he wanted to follow him, but far too big and too untested for cattle work. "I'll be back, boy," Arthur called, though the wind nearly swallowed the words. The snow intensified with frightening speed. By the time Arthur reached the herd, he could barely see 10 feet ahead. He moved the cattle toward the lower brush line, straining his voice over the howling wind. It was slow, exhausting work. The animals were jumpy, pushed by panic more than obedience. One calf broke from the group, wandering toward open ground and disappearing into the curtain of white. "Not today," Arthur muttered. He went after it. What followed wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cinematic. It was just a bad moment in a bad place. Arthur stepped on a patch of ice hidden beneath loose snow. His right foot shot sideways. His weight twisted. And his ankle snapped with a sound he felt more than heard. The world tilted. The fence posts beside him rushed up fast and cracked against his temple. For a few moments, Arthur didn't move. He lay in the snow, blinking through a burst of stars. The cold seeped into his bones, merciless and immediate. When he tried to stand, his leg folded beneath him like wet rope. His breath hitched at the pain. He cursed once, softly, tiredly, and began crawling. There was no one for miles. No other ranchers, no traffic, no help. This wasn't the kind of place where neighbors passed by often, and certainly not during a storm like this. Arthur knew the truth the way only a man who has lived long on lonely land can know it. If he didn't get back to shelter soon, he wouldn't be getting back at all. He pulled himself forward toward the windbreak, every inch gained feeling like a mile. The cold clamped down hard. His hands numbed. His breath turned to needles in his throat. The snow piled deeper around him, threatening to bury him inside it. His mind flickered to Martha. Her voice. Her laugh. The way the ranch looked before everything got so damn heavy. His body shivered once, then slowed. And somewhere in the deep white noise of the blizzard, another sound began to pulse. A rhythm. A vibration. Heavy and steady, like distant drumbeats rolling across the earth. Arthur forced his eyes open. A shadow was coming through the whiteout. A massive silhouette, growing larger, closer, more impossible with every step. Samson. The giant horse burst through the storm like something carved from the very mountains, snow plastered against his dark coat, mane whipping in wild strands. He drew up beside Arthur and lowered his head, blowing hot breath against the man's half-frozen cheek. Arthur reached up with shaking fingers and grabbed the halter. "Samson, help!" He had no idea what the horse understood, if he understood anything at all, but Samson reacted instantly. He stepped sideways, planting himself between Arthur and the brutal wind. His body became a shield, a living wall of warmth. He nudged Arthur again, harder this time, trying to lift him. Arthur gritted his teeth, grabbed a fistful of thick mane, and pulled. Pain seared through his broken ankle. His vision went black around the edges. But he managed to get halfway up Samson's side, draped like an old coat over the horse's massive withers. Samson stood absolutely still, bracing, waiting. And when Arthur's grip tightened, Samson moved. He didn't head for the barn or the corral. Somehow, impossibly, he headed straight toward the ranch house. He plowed through snowdrifts that swallowed fences whole. He trudged through wind strong enough to knock a grown man flat. Arthur's weight didn't slow him. The storm didn't slow him. Nothing did. Minutes stretched like hours. Arthur drifted in and out of consciousness, clinging to the collar strapped around Samson's neck. More than once he thought he'd slip. More than once he thought the horse would falter. But Samson never faltered. When they finally reached the house, Samson climbed the porch steps one by one, steps that had supported nothing heavier than Arthur's boots for decades. The wood groaned. The rails trembled. And then they stopped at the door. Arthur slid off and hit the porch hard. The warmth of the wood felt like salvation. He pulled himself inside, fumbling for the phone, barely able to speak through chattering teeth. He called for help. Then everything went dark. He woke 2 days later in a hospital bed, wrapped in heated blankets, his ankle wrapped and immobilized. "You're lucky," the doctor said. "Another hour and we would have been having a very different conversation." But Arthur knew better. Luck hadn't dragged him home. A horse had. And not just any horse. The wrong horse. The mistake horse. Samson. Arthur returned to the ranch sooner than the doctors wanted. Hospitals made him restless, and the thought of Samson waiting back home kept tugging at him harder than the pain in his ankle. His neighbor, Miller, drove him the whole way, grumbling about snow drifts and hospital bills, but when they pulled up the long drive, both men fell silent. Samson stood in the front paddock, head high, watching the truck approach like he'd been expecting Arthur's return. He didn't pace. He didn't fuss. He simply stood anchor still, the way only a giant can, grounded, steady, unshaken. When Arthur stepped out on his crutches, Samson walked to the fence and lowered his head until it nearly touched Arthur's cheek. The warm breath that rolled over him felt like a welcome home. "You stubborn miracle," Arthur murmured, burying his face in the thick mane. For a moment, he allowed himself to believe everything might turn around. That the storm had taken the worst of the season with it. That maybe, just maybe, Samson's arrival meant something bigger than a mix-up on a shipping manifest. But the universe wasn't done testing him. 2 weeks after the blizzard, the letter arrived. It came in a plain envelope, shoved into the old ranch mailbox leaning sideways at the end of the drive. No warning, no phone call, no knock at the door. Just a quiet slip of paper that had the weight of a hammer. Arthur unfolded it at the kitchen table and read slowly, his finger tracing every line. "Notice of foreclosure. 30 days to settle arrears. Failure to comply may result in property seizure." The words hit harder than any winter storm. Harder than the fall that had nearly killed him. He stared out the window at Samson grazing in the thin winter light. The enormous horse moved with a gentleness that seemed to defy his size. Every step was deliberate. Every flick of the ear, every quiet breath, every shift of shadow, it was all strangely comforting. "I can't lose this place," Arthur whispered. But the truth sat across from him like an unwelcome guest, unavoidable, immovable. The drought had taken the pastures. The bills had taken the savings. And now the bank was coming for what was left. He held the letter until his hand shook, then set it down carefully, as though dropping it too suddenly might break the last fragile piece of his life. For the next week, Arthur tried everything. He called old friends. He dug through boxes looking for anything worth selling. He made a list of equipment and tools to auction off, things that held memories he hated to part with. But no matter how thin he sliced the numbers, the math didn't change. He was going to lose the ranch. The idea hollowed him out. When the day of the liquidation sale arrived, the yard filled with trucks, trailers, and bargain seekers. Old neighbors eyed his equipment with sympathy. Others talked loudly about prices and deals. It felt like strangers were picking through the bones of his life. But Arthur kept his face steady. He moved slow, leaning on his cane, answering questions about old tools, explaining the quirks of the tractor that hadn't run right since 2008. People handed him cash. Signed bills of sale. Loaded up their purchases and drove away. Piece by piece, the ranch shrank. Samson stood quietly at the paddock fence watching the entire thing, ears flicking as if he sensed the heaviness. Every so often Arthur would glance over, and the sight of the giant horse staring back at him was the only thing keeping him from walking away from it all. By late afternoon, most of the equipment was gone. Only a few old ranch items remained near the barn. Arthur leaned against the porch railing, exhausted, when he heard a sound that didn't fit the rest of the day at all, the soft hum of a luxury engine. A black SUV rolled slowly up the driveway. Arthur straightened, confused. This wasn't the sort of vehicle that showed up to ranch sales. A man stepped out. Trimmed suit. Polished shoes. Sunglasses that didn't belong within 100 miles of Wyoming dirt. He scanned the yard like he was searching for something, or someone. Then his eyes landed on Samson. He walked straight toward the paddock. Arthur's stomach tightened with a kind of instinctive protectiveness. He followed, shifting his cane to steady himself. When the stranger stopped at the fence, he removed his sunglasses and stared at Samson like he'd just discovered a long-lost relic. "Where did you get this horse?" the man asked, voice professional but edged with excitement. Arthur hesitated. "Bought him from an auction. Wasn't the horse I ordered. Wasn't even the right breed." The man's gaze didn't move from Samson. "Do you know what he is?" Arthur chuckled bitterly. "An expensive mistake?" For the first time, the stranger looked at him. "Sir, this horse is Midnight's Titan." Arthur blinked slowly. "You're mistaken." "No," the man said softly, stepping closer. "I'm not." He reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone, swiping through photos. 2 years ago, this horse, Titan, was stolen from a logging facility in Oregon. Champion bloodlines. Winner of multiple heavy pull competitions. Valued in the 6 figures. He vanished without a trace. Until now. Arthur stared at the screen. There he was. Samson. Titan. The same blaze, the same build, the same impossible presence. A sick weight settled in Arthur's chest. "He's stolen?" he said quietly. "We believe so," the man replied. "We also believe you bought him in good faith." Arthur took a step back, gripping the fence. Samson turned his head toward him, one dark eye soft and steady. "He's not mine, then." The words tasted like loss. The man made a quick call. Low voice. Urgent tone. When he hung up, he said, "The owners are flying in tomorrow. They've been searching for him since the day he disappeared." Arthur swallowed, feeling the ground tilt beneath him. Losing the ranch was already tearing him apart. Losing Samson on top of that? It felt like watching the last light in the room flicker out. "Look," the man added, softer this time. "I know this is a lot. But they deserve to know he's alive." Arthur nodded slowly. "Yeah. They do." But the truth settled into him like cold settling into old bones. Samson wasn't a mistake. He was a miracle that didn't belong to him. And by morning, Arthur would have to say goodbye. Morning came quietly, too quietly for the kind of day Arthur knew was waiting for him. The winter sky was pale, washed-out blue, the kind that follows a cold night and promises a colder day. The ranch felt hollow. Even the wind moved differently, slipping through the fence rails like it was searching for what was about to be lost. Samson stood in the paddock, coat glistening with frost, his breath rolling out in slow clouds. He didn't seem nervous. He didn't seem unsettled. He simply watched Arthur with that deep, steady way of his, as if he already understood everything that was coming. Arthur's ankle still throbbed when he walked, but he didn't use the cane this morning. Not for pride. Not for stubbornness. Simply because he wanted both hands free when it came time to say goodbye. He didn't call Samson over. Didn't whistle or pat his leg. Didn't ask for one more moment he wasn't entitled to. Samson came on his own. The big horse stepped up to Arthur and rested his massive head gently against the man's chest. Warm. Heavy. Familiar. Arthur closed his eyes, breathing in the scent of hay and winter and the quiet, powerful presence that had filled his life since the day that delivery truck rumbled up the drive. "You've done more for me than you'll ever know," Arthur whispered. Samson breathed out, soft and warm across Arthur's coat. A vehicle approached. Not the black SUV. Not a ranch truck. But a long, gleaming horse trailer, new, polished, and expensive enough to make Arthur's jaw tighten. Then another truck behind it. and another. The kind of convoy you'd expect for a champion racehorse, not an old ranch with patched fences and aging barns. A man and woman stepped out first. They looked around with a mixture of nerves and hope, the kind of hope you only see in people searching for something they'd once believed was gone forever. The woman spotted Samson and slapped a hand over her mouth. Her knees buckled. She started walking, then running, tears sliding down her face. "Titan!" she cried. Samson's ears shot forward. His head lifted, and a deep, joyous whinny tore out of him, louder, more alive than any sound Arthur had heard from the horse before. The giant trotted toward the fence, almost dancing, shoving his nose into the woman's hands while she sobbed into his mane. The man joined her, stroking Samson's wide neck, whispering the name, Titan, like a prayer. Arthur stepped back. He didn't belong in that moment. As much as it tore at him, it felt like watching someone be reunited with a long-lost child. A family restored. The suited representative from the day before approached Arthur. "They'd been searching for him ever since he disappeared," he said. 2 years. Every auction, every lead, every rumor." Arthur nodded. "He remembers them." "He does," the man said softly. "Horses despondent never forget." Arthur swallowed hard. "So, what happens now?" The man hesitated. "They'll want to take him home. Back to Oregon. Back to the sanctuary he came from." Sanctuary. Arthur had imagined something different. Fancy barns. Perfect pastures. Professional handlers. Nothing like the patched-together ranch he was barely holding on to. He nodded anyway. "He belongs with them." The older couple approached Arthur next. The woman's eyes were still red. Her hands shook slightly as she extended one toward him. "You kept him safe," she whispered. "You cared for him. You saved him in that storm. We owe you more than we can ever put into words." "It was the horse who saved me," Arthur said quietly. The husband smiled. "Titan always did have a good nose for people." They talked for a moment, about the blizzard, about the auction, about all the months Samson spent on that ranch without anyone knowing who he really was. Then the husband's expression shifted, sharp with realization. "Mr. Shelby, may I ask something? When did you say you got the foreclosure letter?" Arthur blinked. "Last week." The man exchanged a look with his wife. "Come with us," he said. They walked toward the porch, away from the crowd, away from Samson, who was still leaning into the woman's arms. The husband took a deep breath. "We've been searching for Titan, yes, but we're also expanding our sanctuary operation. Draft horses like him need peace. Space. Long, quiet pasture land. And frankly, those places are hard to find, and even harder to manage properly." His wife nodded. "We've hoped to open a second location. Somewhere smaller. More personal. Somewhere with soul." Arthur frowned. "I'm not sure what that has to do with me." The man looked around, at the land, the hills, the old barns held together by Arthur's stubbornness. "This ranch has exactly what we need. Quiet, open, away from the chaos of the bigger facility. We want to lease it," the woman said gently. "Long-term. Fair price. Guaranteed income. And if you're willing, we want you to run it." Arthur froze. "Run it? As what?" he asked, confused. "A sanctuary manager," the man replied. "A caretaker. Someone who understands hard land and hard animals. Someone who knows that a horse isn't just a tool. Someone who sees their soul." Arthur felt a tremor move through him, slow and deep. "I don't know much about draft horses." The husband laughed softly. "Titan didn't seem to mind." Arthur looked toward the paddock. Samson, Titan, lifted his head and looked straight at him. Not at the owners. Not at the trailer. At Arthur. That same calm, steady connection that had formed in silence on cold mornings and dusty evenings. The same connection that had dragged a dying man home through a blizzard. It was still there. Unbroken. Arthur blinked back sudden tears. "So, he'd come back here? After his vet checks and all that?" The couple nodded. He's retired. He'd spend his days here. With you. Arthur closed his eyes and exhaled the breath he'd been holding all year. Maybe longer. When he opened them, Samson was still watching him. Still waiting. Still asking. Arthur nodded once, small, but sure. All right, he whispered. Let's do it. The relief that washed over him felt like sunlight after a long, bitter winter. Over the next months, the ranch transformed. Fresh lumber mended old barns. Pastures reopened. A new sign went up. Shelby Draft Sanctuary, managed in partnership with Titan Ridge. One by one, massive silhouettes moved across Arthur's land, Percherons, Shires, aging Clydesdales rescued from heavy labor. Horses broken by work. Horses needing rest. Horses needing someone who saw more in them than muscle and weight. And through all of it, Samson, Titan, returned. Not as a mistake. Not as a burden. But as the heartbeat of the place. Arthur would often stand on the porch in the evenings, leaning against the rail as the sun slipped behind the mountains. The giant horses grazed in the golden light, their shadows stretching long and peaceful across the fields. Samson always stood near the center, watchful, calm, the same mountain of a horse he'd been the day he arrived by accident. But now, Arthur understood something he hadn't back then. That wrong delivery was the most important right turn his life had ever taken. A mistake that wasn't a mistake at all. A miracle in a dark coat. And the beginning of a new story on a ranch that had almost slipped away.